Oh, my fellow apes, are you ready? Are you ready for the second episode on Ben Shapiro?
Once a week, I'll take a commonly made leftist claim, the kind of claim that your friends push all over your social media feed.
No justice, no peace!
And I'll walk you through all the supporting research to debunk their arguments and expose every fallacy the left throws at you. And what's better, I'll do it in 15 minutes or less.
In my first response to Ben Shapiro's documentary titled The Atheist Delusion, I critiqued his rhetoric, emphasising his heavy reliance on the fallacies of strawmanning and nutpicking, despite him speaking out against such practice elsewhere. This time, however, I'm going to turn my attention to his references and quotes. Ben tells us that he's done the research, asserting that we could either spend, per topic, years digesting hundreds of books written by people with expertise, or we could simply listen to Ben to become an expert ourselves.
You could spend years researching these topics, you could read all of the books, or you could just come hang out with me here every week and know more on all of these topics than all your leftist friends. Become an expert. Debunked. Only on the Daily Wire.
Now, that's quite the claim, isn't it? Ben is prolific in his output, with Debunked being just one of his many projects, and yet he insists that each and every week he'll completely settle extremely complicated and controversial debates, some of which having been fiercely contested for millennia within just 15 minutes.
And what's better, I'll do it in 15 minutes or less.
Look, whatever your political and religious views might be, if this claim doesn't tickle your spidey senses, then I've got a Nigerian prince that I'd like to introduce you to. So, has Ben done his research? Does Ben back up his claims with facts and logic, or does he rely on his feelings? Do the people that he references actually support what he suggests they're supporting, or is he doing them a disservice? Well, let's find out, shall we? As with all projects that claim to be factual, one would expect for the Atheist Delusion to not only be well researched and well referenced, but perhaps even nuanced, recognising at least a few areas with room for rational disagreement. We know, of course, from the previous episode that such nuance is well and truly out the window, but what about Ben's research and references? Ben is, after all, issuing an extraordinary claim. His central thesis is that atheists are deluded, and as Carl Sagan put it, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Given this, we can assume that Ben will have some solid references to demonstrate precisely why atheists are deluded. I mean, Ben has always been quick to point out when others don't supply adequate references, and so surely he isn't going to be so hypocritical as to fail to provide an adequate array of his own, is he? Now, just as a reminder, the word delusion is used so frequently as to have multiple definitions. For instance, the Oxford Dictionary offers a very loose definition of a delusion being a false belief or opinion about yourself or your situation, with this pretty much reducing the word down to a mere synonym of wrong. But they also offer a more robust definition, stating that a delusion is a fixed false belief that is resistant to reason or confrontation with actual fact. Unsurprisingly, psychiatrists tend to favour definitions more akin to the latter, with a good example being found in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual on Mental Disorders, which defines delusions as fixed beliefs that are not amendable to change in light of conflicting evidence. The authors also acknowledge that the distinction between a delusion and a strongly held idea is sometimes difficult to make, and depends in part on the degree of conviction with which the belief is held, despite clear or reasonable contradictory evidence regarding its veracity. Now, unfortunately, despite Ben's thesis being that atheists are deluded, he doesn't define the word delusion at all. And further still, he doesn't actually provide us with any references for any of his claims, nor the people he quotes. None. Not a single reference. So if someone wants to check Ben's resources, they're going to have to dig them up themselves. But that is, indeed, precisely what I've done. And I must say, we're lucky to live in an age where this is possible, because any other time in history, this task would have been extremely difficult. Now, the last thing I want to touch upon before delving in is to answer a question that some viewers might have. What is the point in me fact-checking Ben? Why do this? Why spend Patreon support on this task? Well, Ben claims to care about facts, and so does his audience. The narrative that he weaves is of him and his flock holding a sword of facts and a shield of logic, striking down on an opposition holding little more than emotion and manipulation. But as I hope I illustrated in my last instalment, to be convinced of this is to be delusional. Ben very much embodies the attributes he claims to despise, and if by revealing how weak his references are will get just one Daily Wire subscriber to be more skeptical of Ben's claims in the future, then I'd consider this project a success. At the end of the day, Ben has power and influence, and this alone justifies others putting in the due diligence that he doesn't. Who doesn't like a bit of Ricky Gervais? Huh?
It's Friday afternoon and this is what it's come to. Ricky Gervais has stuck some tissue paper into his mouth.
I'm a bit tired. There are jumbo fish fingers.
While Ben doesn't at all define the word delusion, he obliquely defines atheism a few times throughout his documentary, and especially in his introduction.
God, according to atheists, is an unnecessary hypothesis. The universe just is. We just are. There's no reason to search for a creator, to posit that he cares about us, to suggest that there is some higher power that bridges the gap from what is to how things ought to be.
Now, to anyone who knows anything about atheism, this definition, this description, will come across as frankly comical. Before we critique it, however, let's play the clip that immediately follows these assertions from Ben. That is, the reference that Ben provides.
You say, there's a God. I say, can you prove that? You say no, I say I don't believe you then.
This clip of Ricky is from a discussion he had with Stephen Colbert about atheism, and unlike Ben's claims, Ricky very obviously didn't state that the universe just is.
The universe just is.
Nor that we just are.
We just are.
Nor that there's no reason to search for a creator.
There's no reason to search for a creator.
And even if he did, this still wouldn't substantiate Ben's claims, since atheism isn't defined by Ricky's cosmological and existential views. This makes Ben's inclusion of Ricky's words pretty damn bizarre in and of itself, but what's ironic is that earlier in the interview, Ricky points out that when it comes to the existence of the universe, the question should be, how is there something rather than nothing, instead of why is there something rather than nothing, which suggests that at least this atheist does care about how the universe came to be.
Why is there something instead of why is there nothing? Why does the universe exist at all? Why is there something?
But surely the bigger question is not why, but how. Well, why is irrelevant, isn't
Okay,
it?
fine.
And in addition to contradicting Ben's claims of atheists not caring about the cosmos, Ricky also happened to provide a clear definition of how most self-described atheists define the relevant terms. It was right there for Ben to work with.
This is the thing, right? So I'm an agnostic atheist, technically. Agnostics means no one knows whether there's a God. So everyone's technically agnostic. We don't know.
That's true,
So
that's true.
an agnostic atheist is someone who doesn't know there's a God or not, as no one does.
So you're not convicted of your atheism?
Well,
You're
I
not
am.
Sure.
No, I am, because atheism is only rejecting the claim that there is a God. Atheism isn't a belief system.
Atheism isn't a belief system.
Atheism. So this is atheism in a nutshell. You say, there's a God. I say, can you prove that? You say no. I say I don't believe you then.
Indeed, Ricky quite literally said, atheism isn't a belief system.
Atheism isn't a belief system.
A sentence before the words that Ben played. And just before that, Ricky clearly provided what is by far the most prominent definition of atheism, the definition that is favoured by the vast majority of self-described atheists. To reiterate, an atheist is someone who lacks a belief in a god or gods. And that's it. It's not that hard to get your head around. Just as pretty much everyone viewing this video will be an A flat earther or an A reincarnationist, atheists are atheists, that is, non-theists. We're not convinced by the alleged evidence and proofs of God's existence, just as Ben isn't convinced of the alleged evidence and proofs of reincarnation. And just as Ben's lack of belief in reincarnation doesn't entail him thinking that the universe just is, that we just are, and that reincarnation is an unnecessary hypothesis, the same applies to atheists in regard to theism. Now, there's more to be said here, but I've already put in more time into defining atheism than Ben does in his entire documentary. So I'll just say that if you're interested in the debate around the definition of atheism, then be sure to check out my video titled The 100% Real Definition of Atheism, in which I delve into the history and literature. Anyhow, the key takeaway from this chapter is this. Far from offering a respectful definition of atheism, Ben made one up on the spot, defining atheism as a view that takes a specific stance on psychological, cosmological, existential, and even ethical propositions. And to support his definition, he played a clip of Ricky sticking paper in his mouth. Or, I should say, Ben might as well have, because the clip he played of Ricky in no way whatsoever substantiated Ben's claims.
I say I don't believe you then.
And as a cherry on top, the interview that Ben took irrelevant words from Ricky from contained Ricky succinctly stating the most popular definition of atheism, the definition that most self-described atheists sign off on, which would have made for a great start for Ben's documentary. But no, Ben had to rely on his true and tested straw man and nut-picking fallacies. If you can't beat them, define their position into something so insultingly stupid that only your own flock won't bat an eyelid. Want to know something else you can do in just 15 minutes? Sin. That's right, you can actually stimulate your noggin by using Blinkist. Unlike Ben, who claims he can give you all the information you need in just 15 minutes.
15 minutes or less.
Blinkist provides key ideas from non-fiction bestsellers in minutes. And after slamming through their philosophy section over the last month, I'm jealous of the fact that I didn't know about them until recently. They offer over 5,500 titles covering 27 different categories, and while commuting, doing housework and walking, I thoroughly appreciated having Blinkist as a buddy. After listening to just a few of their books, they recommended to me their Sam Harris section, which has some absolute doozies in it, such as Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. But my favourite section is certainly the philosophy. From Kant's critique of pure reason, to Descartes' meditations on first philosophy, to Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, to Hume's inquiry concerning human understanding, I really wish I knew about Blinkist before buying these books and struggling to get through them. Because between you, me, and everyone else, Kant's writing is pretty difficult to read, and having a decent source succinctly state his key points is extremely useful. By clicking my link below, you can get 25% off Blinkist Premium and enjoy 2 memberships for the price of 1. Yeah, 2. You can give one to your friends so that they can enjoy, on you, everything that Blinkist has to offer, with you both being able to recommend titles and share favourites with each other. What's more, you get 7 days completely free, during which you can cancel if you're not entirely satisfied with the product. So if you'd like a helping hand in becoming who you want to be in 2023, then please check out the link below. After playing a clip of Ricky not at all supporting the weird definition that Ben gave of atheism, Ben continues by saying,
Atheism is more than mere agnosticism, which suggests that it is impossible to know whether God exists. By that definition of agnosticism, many religious people are agnostic. Atheism, however, adamantly opposes the idea of a God who stands behind nature.
You scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes.
So let's break this down. First, we have Ben indirectly defining agnosticism, which he claims
suggests that it is impossible to know whether God exists.
And to support this definition, he's offered no references. He's simply telling us what agnosticism is. Well, kind of, because to say that agnosticism suggests that it's impossible to know whether God exists is ambiguous. It doesn't tell us anything. So let's assume that agnosticism is the view that it is, no ifs, no buts, impossible to know if God exists. And let's assume that we're in the 19th century. If we do this, then Ben is largely correct to define agnosticism this way, per Thomas Huxley's coinage. But what about today? Is Ben's definition accurate today? No, it isn't. Very few self-described agnostics today would sign off on this definition. If you speak to them, they'll tell you, per what Ricky said and Ben omitted, that they personally don't know if God exists, and that they often see the evidence to be roughly counterbalanced. They will not tell you that they know that it's impossible to know if God exists. And just to cross the T's and dot the I's, if you're thinking that the real definition of agnosticism is how Thomas coined it since he invented the term, then you'd be committing an etymology fallacy. If we're going to play this game, then Christians are atheists, since that's what the Romans called them for not believing in the Greco-Roman gods. But let's get back to Ben's definition of agnosticism.
Atheism is more than mere agnosticism, which suggests that it is impossible to know whether God exists. By that definition of agnosticism, many religious people are agnostic.
Yeah, and so too are most atheists, just as Ricky said. Next up, Ben claimed that atheists adamantly oppose the idea of a God who stands behind nature.
Atheism, however, adamantly opposes the idea of a God who stands behind nature.
I made a few comments about this in my last instalment, and so won't repeat them here. I'll add, though, that according to Ben's definition of atheism, which again he's made up on the spot, I'm not an atheist, since I don't adamantly oppose the idea of a God behind nature. To the contrary, I entirely understand and appreciate why so many have inferred an intelligent being behind various states of the universe. I think that God is a fair hypothesis that until the scientific revolution seemingly had decent explanatory value, but like the miasma theory of disease, I think that theism, and especially Abrahamic theism, has been exposed as being extremely unlikely to be true. And how did Ben back up this claim of atheism adamantly opposing the idea of a God who stands behind nature? Yeah, he played a clip of Ayn Rand.
You scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes.
Now, as mentioned in the previous episode, while Ayn was an atheist, her political views are not entailed by atheism. There's many atheists that don't scorn churches and the concept of God, and Ben surely knows this. He can't be that uninformed. Can he? But to check his due diligence, was Ayn really, as Ben claimed, adamantly opposing the idea of a God who stands behind nature? Well, the actual context of the interview is Ayn responding to criticisms levied at her book, Atlas Shrugged, and the discussion revolves around her views on morality rather than her views on God.
That you are out to destroy almost every edifice in the contemporary American way of life, our Judeo-Christian religion, our modified government-regulated capitalism, our rule by the majority will. Other reviews have said that you scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes. I agree with the facts, but not the estimate of this criticism. Namely, if I am challenging the base of all these institutions, I'm challenging the moral code of altruism, the precept that man's moral duty is to live for others, that man must sacrifice himself to others, which is the present-day morality.
What do you mean by sacrifice himself for others? We're getting to the point.
One moment. Since I'm challenging the base, I necessarily would challenge the institutions, you name it, which are a result of that morality.
All right.
And now what is self-sacrifice?
Yes, what is self-sacrifice? You say that you do not like the altruism by which we live. You like a certain kind of Ayn Randist selfishness.
I would say that I don't like is too weak a word. I consider it evil. And self-sacrifice is the precept that man needs to serve others in order to justify his existence, that his moral duty is to serve others. That is what most people believe today.
The full context of this exchange reveals that Ayn was answering several questions relating to her political philosophy of libertarianism, which features in Atlas Shrugged. She was asked if she opposes the United States' fondness of religion,
our Judeo-Christian religion,
government-regulated capitalism,
our modified government-regulated capitalism,
democracy,
our rule by the majority will,
and then she was asked if she scorns churches, and whether all these statements are accurate.
Other reviews have said that you scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes. I agree with the facts, but not the estimate of this criticism.
And Ayn responded by affirming that she challenges all of this and then some.
I'm challenging the moral code of altruism.
And what Ben has done is strip the references of regulated capitalism and democracy and kept only the reference of Ayn scorning churches. And he's done this to somehow substantiate his claim that atheism, that is, all atheists, scorn religion. What? I guess we're just lucky that Ben likes capitalism and democracy, huh? For if he didn't, he would have played Ayn in full, and then all of a sudden atheism would have been Ayn's entire political philosophy, and not just the parts that Ben doesn't like. That's how definitions work for Ben, isn't it? After a rocky start, you might be thinking that Ben just isn't in the game of accuracy, but don't be so quick, or else you're going to get hitch-slapped for all of the points. Following the clip of Ayn not substantiating what Ben claimed, Ben says the following.
Atheism often claims that religion corrupts mankind.
If you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion.
And I'm ecstatic to say that Ben's done a fine job here. No, wait. No, he hasn't. He said that atheism often claims.
Atheism often claims.
Rather than atheists often claim. This is like saying that Judaism often skips prayers. Now, I'm not going to nitpick. Ben's expressing that some atheists claim that religion corrupts mankind, and to back up his point, he's played a clip of Christopher saying,
if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion.
This clip is taken from a debate that Christopher had with Tony Blair on the notion of whether or not religion is a force for good in the world. And while it backs up what Ben says, fair enough, the full context really gives the full force that it deserves.
Religion forces nice people to do unkind things, and also makes intelligent people say stupid things. Handed a small baby for the first time, is it your first reaction to think, beautiful, almost perfect, now please hand me the sharp stone for its genitalia that I may do the work of the Lord? No. It is, as the great physicist Steven Weinberg has very aptly put it, in the ordinary moral universe, the good will do the best they can, the worst will do the worst they can, but if you want to make good people do wicked things, you'll need religion.
As Christopher said, the origin of this quote resides with Steven Weinberg, who said, with or without religion, you would have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. This quote certainly suggests that religion corrupts mankind, and Ben didn't say all of atheists, but rather often atheism, so fair enough. For what it's worth, I've always found Weinberg's quote to be slightly off, but for an arguably pedantic reason. As Sam Harris has expressed effectively on numerous occasions, the problem with religion, or I should say, my problem with religion, is not religion in and of itself, but rather the dogma and tribalism that religion rests upon. When theists mutilate the genitalia of little boys and little girls, there's pretty much no conversation to be had, since the theist guardians are dogmatically convinced, through and through, that despite the child being created perfect, in the image of God, no less, the morally right thing to do, no, the moral imperative, is to slice off the part that's presumably not created in God's image. This is, and always has, been a revolting and disgraceful practice, and you have to admit that without religion you'd be hard-pressed, needing, per each and every case, a damn fine medical justification to get the guardians to commit such an act. Anyhow, before concluding this chapter, let's hear a bit more of what Christopher had to say. Not because it especially adds to my critique to Ben, but because Christopher was awesome. He was a wizard, and hell, I just want to hear him again.
Salvation is offered. Redemption, indeed, is promised at the low price of the surrender of your critical faculties. Religion, it might be said, must be said, would have to admit, makes extraordinary claims, but though I would maintain that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, rather daringly provides not even ordinary evidence for its extraordinary supernatural claims. Therefore, we might begin by asking, and I'm asking my opponent as well as you when you consider your voting, is it good for the world to appeal to our credulity and not to our skepticism? Is it good for the world to worship a deity that takes sides in wars and human affairs? To appeal to our fear and to our guilt, is it good for the world? To our terror of death, is it good to appeal? To preach guilt and shame about the sexual act and the sexual relationship, is this good for the world? And asking yourself the while, are these really religious responsibilities, as I maintain they are? To terrify children with the image of hell and eternal punishment, not just of themselves, but of their parents and those they love. Perhaps worst of all, to consider women an inferior creation. Is that good for the world? And can you name me a religion that has not done that? To insist that we are created and not evolved in the face of all the evidence. To say that certain books of legend and myth, man-made and primitive, are revealed not man-made code.
Never have I missed a man that I never met so much, so fiercely. When Christopher was dying, he effectively said that we can resurrect Shakespeare at our leisure by simply reading his words. And now Christopher, like Shakespeare, is immortal in the works he left behind, and the many hearts that he inspired. And so, maybe it's not so strange that I love a person that I never met, because in a very real sense, he's a part of me. No, wait. We're dealing with Ben Shapiro here, and we know per the last episode, and what we've seen of this episode so far, that atheists are not really humans. We don't think this way. We're thoughtless, emotionless, caustic entities, merely pretending to hold our views.
Being a religious believer is the consistent struggle with the logic of the universe, and that seems to me a deeper and more fulfilling struggle than simply pretending the universe has no meaning at all.
After giving us a pretty fair statement about a portion of atheists, Ben then goes on to say that atheists think that
the notion of a God blinds men to the truths around them, that science is directly opposed to the idea of a creator.
And to support this, he plays a few words from Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
Now, unfortunately, Ben has yet again failed to digest the context of the clip he's included, or indeed, he's deliberately misrepresented it. But in any case, he's certainly done Neil a disservice. This was covered by Alex O'Connor in his review of Ben's documentary, but I think it's deserving of further coverage because it really is impressive just how astronomically Ben managed to mess this one up. The clip in question is taken from a conversation that Neil had with Bill Moyers regarding chiefly the Big Bang Theory. And here's the words from Neil that Ben played, but with the addition of context.
An incredible flash of energy and light, though.
And matter and, all of this, all of the above.
Do you give people who make this case that that was the beginning and that there had to be something that provoked the beginning, do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
What do you mean?
Well, so let me say that differently. All efforts that have been invested by brilliant people of the past have failed at that exercise. They just fail. And so the track record is so poor that going forward I have essentially zero confidence, near zero confidence, that there will be fruitful things to emerge from the effort to reconcile them.
So, it turns out that Neil wasn't saying that
the notion of a God blinds men to the truths around them, that science is directly opposed to the idea of a creator.
No, Neil stated that he considers attempts to reconcile the stories of scripture with science to be a fool's errand. Countless brilliant people have tried to do this in the past, and countless brilliant people have failed.
They just fail.
This is a big enough blunder in and of itself from Ben, but given the words that Neil then graces us with, Ben's quote mining is exposed to be even more absurd. This is quite a segment, I must say, but trust me, it's worth listening to.
So, for example, if you knew nothing about science and you read, say, the Bible, the Old Testament, which in Genesis is an account of nature. That's what that is. And I said to you, give me your description of the natural world based only on this. You would say the world was created in 6 days and that stars are just little points of light, much lesser than the sun. And in fact, they can fall out of the sky, right? Because that's what happens during the Revelation. One of the signs that the second coming is that the stars will fall out of the sky and land on Earth. To even write that means you don't know what those things are. You have no concept of what the actual universe is. So everybody who tried to make proclamations about the physical universe based on Bible passages got the wrong answer. Right. So what happened was, when science discovers things and you want to stay religious, or you want to continue to believe that the Bible is unerring, what you would do is, you would say, well, let me go back to the Bible and reinterpret it. Then you'd say things like, oh, they didn't really mean that literally, they meant that figuratively. So this whole sort of reinterpretation of how figurative the poetic passages of the Bible are came after science showed that this is not how things unfolded. And so the educated religious people are perfectly fine with that. It's the fundamentalists who want to say that the Bible is the literal truth of God, and want to see the Bible as a science textbook, who are knocking on the science doors of the schools, trying to put that content in the science. Enlightened religious people are not behaving that way. They're saying, yes, science is cool, we're good with that, and use the Bible to get your spiritual enlightenment and your emotional fulfillment.
Yeah. Neil explicitly said that educated religious people are not attempting to reinterpret their holy books to fit scientific revelations.
Enlightened religious people are not behaving that way.
And thus, he wasn't even suggesting that
science is directly opposed to the idea of a creator.
To the contrary, in fact, and as clear as day, Neil was explicitly taking issue with fundamentalists, like Ben.
It's the fundamentalists.
So, we've got Ben claiming that atheists believe that science is directly opposed to the idea of God. And to support this, he's played a clip of Neil, who doesn't identify as an atheist, by the way, stating that science is not necessarily opposed to the idea of God. I mean, you couldn't make this up. Bravo, Ben. As a further point, and getting back to Neil not identifying as an atheist, Neil has made clear on numerous occasions that he goes by the title of agnostic, and unsurprisingly, the way that he defines agnosticism is the way that most self-described agnostics define themselves, which is to say, not the way that Ben does. Oh boy, this might be a somewhat hefty chapter, as Ben quotes Richard Dawkins quite a few times, and I can see why. Richard is an extremely prominent atheist. He's arguably, in fact, the most famous atheist of our time. And he wrote The God Delusion, which obviously inspired the title of Ben's documentary.
There are those atheists who claim that logic ought to forbid God, that belief in God is not merely unevidenced, but actually irrational.
I was suggesting that somebody as intelligent as Jesus would have been an atheist if he had known what we know today.
Alright, to say that logic forbids God is to say that it's illogical to believe in God. Or at least that's what it means if we're using the definition of logic that's found in philosophical and theological discourse. And to make this statement, we'd need to first define God in a specific way, most likely as having the triune attributes of being all-powerful, all-loving, and all-knowing, and we'd then need to lean on something like the logical problem of evil. But perhaps when Ben says that logic forbids God, he means that some atheists claim that believing in God doesn't make sense, that it's utterly devoid of reason. This take is arguably more likely, I'd say, since Ben also uses terms like unevidenced and irrational.
There are those atheists who claim that logic ought to forbid God, that belief in God is not merely unevidenced, but actually irrational.
In a nutshell, Ben's using words such as logic, reason, and rationality as synonyms. And to support his claim, he's played a clip of Richard saying that he's convinced that someone as intelligent as Jesus would have been an atheist if he lived today.
I was suggesting that somebody as intelligent as Jesus would have been an atheist if he had known what we know today.
This clip of Richard is taken from an episode of John Harris's National Conversations podcast, and Richard's comment was made in context of John asking him what he'd have to say to Christians who are not voting as to force others to live up to their faith.
Your tea-drinking vicar who doesn't believe that and thinks that
it's a matter of biblical symbolism or
that sort of
poetic writing or whatever.
I mean, of course, those people are very different, and I would have a very different kind of argument with them. I think I would want to press them on what actually they do believe.
But also maybe they believe in turning the other cheek and doing as you would be done by, and the family of man and all those things.
Of course, I mean, those are moral
I mean,
precepts.
do you worry about throwing those sort of ethical babies out with the theistic bathwater?
Of course I would, but I don't think that they're very theistic beliefs. I mean, I think these are moral beliefs that one can arrive at by moral philosophic discussion, and people have.
This is why you have, on occasion in the past, described yourself as a cultural Christian.
I've described myself as a cultural Anglican, I would say. And I've also, I wrote an article called Atheists for Jesus, I think it was.
Can you explain what it is to be an atheist?
Somebody gave me a T-shirt with Atheists for Jesus. Well, the point was that Jesus was a great moral teacher, and I was suggesting that somebody as intelligent as Jesus would have been an atheist if he had known what we know today.
Well, that seems pretty fair by my lights. Sure, if I wanted to nitpick, I'd say that Richard isn't technically saying that it's irrational to believe in God, but rather he's suggesting that it's irrational for specifically intelligent people to believe in God. Yeah, there's a walloping backhand in the shadows here. But no, I largely side with Ben here. Ben said that there are those atheists, which is to say some atheists, that claim that it's irrational to believe in God, and he's played a clip of Richard saying that if Jesus lived today, that is, with the enlightenment of the scientific revolution, and all the shoulders that we stand upon, he'd be an atheist due to his intelligence. I will say, though, that there's so many better sources that Ben could have referenced, such as the works of John Mackey or Henry McCloskey, whose claim can be boiled down to it being impossible for the 4 propositions on screen now all being true. In short, if evil exists, then the God of Abraham doesn't. That's the claim. But no, at this point, I doubt that Ben even knows who these philosophers are. Now, before proceeding, it's worth considering the seconds that play immediately after where Ben cuts Richard off, for reasons I'll get to in just a second. Fortunately, The Guardian has video footage of this part of the exchange. I don't know why they only offer a small amount of video recording, and yet the whole audio, but hey, it's The Guardian. I don't understand a lot of what they do. Anyhow, here's John and Richard's exchange.
Here's the thing. I am an agnostic. I have thought about the tenets, certainly, of Christian belief. And as far as believing in God is concerned, sort of found them wanting, or myself unable to be convinced. But I still think that I can't possibly know whether God exists or not anymore. I mean, am I being sort of, what's the word? Oh, weak-willed, guilty of not having the courage of my convictions?
No, I mean, I'm an agnostic too in that sense. In the God Delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 was total conviction that there is a God, and 7 is total conviction that there isn't. And I put myself as a 6. Okay, so that's kind of agnostic, but veering towards atheist. And I would be a 6 with respect to fairies and pixies and werewolves and things like that.
So, yeah, Ben will quote Richard when it suits him, but when it comes to Richard defining atheism, the very next sentence, Ben and his team will avoid it like it's the plague, just as they did with Ricky. Anyhow, let's get to another quote from Richard that Ben utilizes, shall we?
The very specific conditions under which our universe was created that allowed for the development of intelligent human life are often used by believers as proof of God's hand. The so-called fine-tuning of the universe for life is extraordinary. If, for example, the strength of the Big Bang had differed by 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, the universe just would not exist the way that it does right now.
If the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever.
I'm fighting the urge not to offer refutation to the fine-tuning argument, but just know that I'm saving it for a further instalment. Back to the quote, what we have is Ben claiming that the universe was created, and no, he doesn't give us reason to believe that it was created, he just assumes it was by misunderstanding the Big Bang Theory like every other apologist, and he says a few things regarding the creation. One being that if things were different at the beginning, then things would be different now.
If, for example, the strength of the Big Bang had differed by 1 part in 10 to the 60th power, the universe just would not exist the way that it does right now.
As to how he knows things could have been different at all, he doesn't tell us. In short, he's pulling his priors out of a theological orifice. But Ben also claims that if things were different, then we wouldn't have intelligent life.
The very specific conditions under which our universe was created that allowed for the development of intelligent human life are often used by believers as proof of God's hand.
Again, I'm not going to get into the argument here. I'm going to focus on Ben's references, to which he gives us Richard saying,
if the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever.
So is Richard claiming, like Ben, that the original conditions of the universe suggest intelligent design? Well, the clip is from a conversation that Richard had with Greene, and here's the context.
If those laws, if the implication is that those laws were cunningly designed, cunningly crafted, as many people think they were, so that atoms should come into existence, so that chemistry should come into existence, so that stars should come into existence, so that nuclear reactions in stars could produce the elements, so that they'd explode and we'd get a suitable chemistry to make life and then the origin of life and so on. If the deistic God thought all that through and set up the laws of physics, then he would have to be damn clever. He would have to be the physicist to end all physicists. I don't care if he then withdraws. He needs an explanation in his own right. And it seems to me that the noble scientific enterprise is to start from as near nothing as you can get.
Yeah, the answer is no, isn't it? Far from saying that if the original conditions were different we wouldn't have life, and thus the conditions indicate intelligent design, Richard assumes for sake of theistic argument that the conditions are very specific, per Brian's questions, and then explicitly points out that under these conditions we'd be left with more questions than we started with. Most chiefly, we'd need an explanation for God.
He needs an explanation in his own right.
Indeed, Ben has backed up his claim of the initial conditions of the universe deeply suggesting an intelligent designer by playing a clip of Richard who, in context, was suggesting the bloody opposite. Again, bravo Ben, bravo. You are incredible, bro. You're smelting snowflakes all across the land. Moving on, Ben also quotes Richard when speaking about consciousness. Here's what he had to say.
Scientists have presented many theories about it, but none has been sufficient to explain how consciousness arises out of the physical processes of the brain. Physicist Roger Penrose explains, quote, "We need a major revolution in our understanding of the physical world in order to accommodate consciousness." Even Richard Dawkins admits that the development of consciousness is, quote, "to me, the most profound mystery facing modern biology."
First and foremost, Ben is engaging in an argument from ignorance, and he's done us the courtesy of not even attempting to hide it. Just as we once appealed to ignorance to prove that God holds the planets in place, controls the weather, and is responsible for the complexity of our form, as opposed to evolution, Ben has recognised that we don't yet have an answer to a question, that is, that there's a gap in our knowledge, and he's plugged that hole with God. But what if Roger Penrose and Richard Dawkins? Both are atheists, and so we know that they don't join Ben in this God of the Gaps move. So what precisely were they saying in context? Well, let's start with Roger. The quote is taken from a conversation between him and Steve Paulson. When Roger says we need a major revolution in our understanding of the physical world in order to accommodate consciousness, he means physical. In a nutshell, Roger believes that our current understanding of the physical world won't reveal the secrets of consciousness, but that an understanding of quantum mechanics will hold the answers. As Steve says in the beginning of the article, drawing from the words of the physicist Lee Smolin, no one quite knows what to make of this theory, but conventional wisdom goes something like this. Their theory is almost certainly wrong, but since Penrose is so brilliant, we'd be foolish to dismiss their theory out of hand. So while Roger is convinced that we need a revolution to understand consciousness, he wouldn't endorse filling the gap with God. As he says later in the conversation, Roger is a very materialistic and physicalist kind of person. If I accurately understand Roger's perspective, there's an analogy that could be drawn with Newtonian physics. Just as we couldn't make sense of certain celestial movements using Newtonian physics, and thus needed the revolution of Einstein, Roger sees the same today with consciousness. The way that Ben quotes Roger gives the impression that science in general thinks there needs to be a revolution to understand consciousness, but as was made clear in the article that Ben took the quote from, Roger's views on consciousness are not well subscribed. And what of Richard? When he said
that the development of consciousness is, quote, "to me, the most profound mystery facing modern biology."
What was the context of what Richard was saying? Well, the quote comes from page 59 of The Selfish Gene, with Richard saying, "Survival machines that can stimulate the future are one jump ahead of survival machines who can only learn on the basis of overt trial and error. The trouble with overt trial is that it takes time and energy. The trouble with overt error is that it's often fatal. Simulation is both safer and faster. The evolution of the capacity to simulate seems to have culminated in subjective consciousness. Why this should have happened is, to me, the most profound mystery facing biology." From this, it's clear, at least to me, that Ben quoting Richard on this one is fine. Richard is indeed saying that he finds the existence of consciousness perplexing. But he'd be the first to point out that Ben's argument from ignorance is indeed an argument from ignorance. But, that makes two quotes for Ben that are fair. Good for him. Finally, let's take a look at another quote from Richard that Ben provides.
Atheists commonly turn to the sins of believers to explain why they oppose belief in God. This is a key point from people like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins. If religion is good, why are religious believers often so bad?
And that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things, believing that they are good.
Let's take a look, shall we, of this very short extract in context.
And yet you spend so much of your time debating people of faith. So clearly people of faith are interested in having discussions. They're not just all blind believers insisting on their way of...
Well, nobody said anything about all of them. I mean, the vast majority of religious people are perfectly good, nice people, as you are. There's no suggestion I've ever made that all religious people are evil. Of course not. There is a logical progression that goes from believing in faith, having faith that your God tells you to do something, and doing terrible deeds, like suicide bombing, like flying planes into skyscrapers. The vast majority of people of faith don't do such terrible things. But those people who do terrible things do it believing that they are righteous and good, and they think that they're doing the will of their God. So they're not evil people, they're actually good people by their own lights. They believe they're doing good things, and that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things, believing that they are good.
As just seen, Richard began by saying that the vast majority of religious people are good, and his criticism specifically targets extremists. More relevantly, Richard did not suggest that the claims of religion are false due to the sins of believers, but simply emphasised that religion often gets otherwise decent people to do and say atrocious things. Yeah, we're back to Steven Weinberg. In other conversations, Ben, of course, agrees with Richard. Religion can get a good person to fly a plane into a building, for instance. Richard's point, applied to Ben, is that if Judaism is false, then Ben's homophobia, and indeed many of his views, are great examples of religion twisting someone into evil deeds. Put more directly, our morality today has adapted to a new environment, and even our moral intuitions are now at odds with scripture. From slavery to misogyny to homophobia to capital punishment, you name it, we've moved on. And we've moved on not only by the lights of reason, but also the depths of our intuition. This is just one piece of evidence that indicates that scripture might not be as correct as it claims to be. You have to hand it to Ben. It's almost as if he said to his elves, bros, okay, he wouldn't say bro. My dudes, fetch me a clip from every super famous atheist, and don't worry about what they're saying, their words don't really matter, they don't need to map onto what I'm going to say. All that matters is that we play clips of them, because that way I'll be able to create the illusion that I'm actually responding to atheist material. We've had the likes of Ricky Gervais, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and now we've got the beautiful Greek god who goes by the human disguise of Stephen Fry.
Atheists often object to God on the grounds that if God is all good, bad things should not happen to good people.
Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
They treat this argument as somehow dispositive. But of course, the question of theodicy has been treated by a variety of major religious thinkers over the course of millennia. Suffice it to say that the question of God's motivation is certainly not strong enough to dismiss God himself, any more than a child can pretend its parents don't exist, because sometimes its parents don't stop bad things from happening.
Yeah, well, the fact that there's so many theodicies illustrates that none of them hold up. It's like having a billion different theories for gravity. And that's all I've got to say, isn't it? Just as Ben didn't explain the problem of evil, nor even one theodicy, I don't need to either. And just as he said his piece and moved on, I can likewise put absolutely no effort in and claim to be an expert. I jest, of course, but the slice of truth here is that Ben is pathetic. Utterly, abysmally pathetic. This is a joke.
You could spend years researching these topics, you could read all of the books, or you could just come hang out with me here every week and know more on all of these topics than all your leftist friends. Become an expert.
But no, I'll do what Ben apparently can't and actually unpack some of this. Ben began by emphasizing atheists who object to God by invoking a variation of the problem of evil.
Atheists often object to God on the grounds that if God is all good, bad things should not happen to good people.
And to support this claim, he played an extract of Stephen saying,
Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world which is so full of injustice and pain?
This clip is from a conversation featured on RTE, Ireland's national public service media. And within it, Stephen not only calls into question the issue of human suffering, which Ben fixed on, but also natural suffering.
Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac. Utter maniac. Totally selfish. We have to spend our life on our knees thanking him? What kind of God would do that? Yes, the world is very splendid, but it also has in it insects whose whole life cycle is to burrow into the eyes of children and make them blind. They eat outwards from the eyes. Why? Why did you do that to us? You could easily have made a creation in which that didn't exist. It is simply not acceptable.
By virtue of God being good, omnibenevolent, he will always act to produce the greatest amount of good. and by virtue of God being all-powerful, omnipotent, he has the power to enact his good will. Given this, it's really quite surprising, is it not, that he's created parasites who feast on the flesh of the innocent. We're told to believe that an all-loving God has deliberately created species that are forced to consume flesh in a prolonged fashion because he loves us. Stephen has raised the problem of natural evil, and Ben has dismissed it by simply saying that theists have dealt with it.
But of course, the question of theodicy has been treated by a variety of major religious thinkers over the course of millennia.
Again, brilliant. Just, oh, bravo, Ben. It's just, God, you love to see it. It's just a shame that all those theodicies fail, though, isn't it?
Suffice it to say that the question of God's motivation is certainly not strong enough to dismiss God himself, any more than a child can pretend its parents don't exist, because sometimes its parents don't stop bad things from happening.
And this, right here, not only misses Stephen's specific point, but the whole problem of evil altogether. Parents are not omnipotent and omnibenevolent, are they? Hence, humans causing evil or failing to prevent evil isn't a contradiction. Now, would you believe me if I said, get this, that Stephen made this very point in the paragraph that Ben took a segment from? Yeah, he said this in regards to the Greek gods. Here it is.
Now, if I died and it was Pluto, Hades, and if it was the 12 Greek gods, then I would have more truck with it, because the Greeks they didn't pretend not to be human in their appetites and in their capriciousness and in their unreasonableness. They didn't present themselves as being all-seeing, all-wise, all-kind, all-beneficent.
Yep. Ben gave us a false analogy, but if he had only digested the words that surrounded the clip he took of Stephen, he'd have realised this. Likewise to what we did for Hitchens, let's hear a bit more from Stephen before closing, because
Stephen is, I'm sorry to say, not quite like other girls. It's his nature.
You know, atheism is not just about not believing there's a God, but on the assumption that there is one. What kind of God is he? It's perfectly apparent that he's monstrous, utterly monstrous, and deserves no respect whatsoever. The moment you banish him, your life becomes simpler, purer, cleaner, more worth living, in my opinion.
So what have we learned from this exercise of Ben defining atheists in all sorts of weird and wacky ways and proceeding to take tons of quotes out of context? As an atheist, I can't say that we've learnt a lot. Ben has always been among the most pathetic of apologists, and this polished turd of a documentary has only solidified his crown. But if you're a theist watching, then I hope that upon seeing his references investigated, you can see Ben's supposed intellectual prowess for what it is. Fabricated toxicity. There is, indeed, room for rational disagreement. Yes, of course, even among intellectual people. And if we're going to live in a cosmopolitan world, then it's in our collective best interest to remove from the table those who aim to serve us poison. Many of Ben's religious fans have, ironically, completely deluded views about what atheism is and who atheists are, which has consequently caused them to drive away much of their once close family and friends. And this documentary from Ben only serves to embolden such bigotry towards what is, at least in the United States, a minority. Anyhow, thanks again to Blinkist for supporting the channel, who, as a reminder, offer key ideas from non-fiction bestsellers in minutes, rather than complete answers to extremely contentious debates that have raged for millennia. And as always, an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members. Without you, I simply wouldn't be able to put in the time that the likes of Ben don't.